Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
It's been nearly a decade since a Canadian Prime Minister has set foot in China, and now Prime Minister Mark Carney is stepping into a firestorm of criticism. On Friday, the PM announced a new deal with China, reducing tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% down to just 6%, opening the door and the border to 49,000 of these cheaper vehicles at the potential expense of North American manufacturing jobs, Canadian jobs, and U.S. tariff negotiations. Within hours of Carney making the announcement, U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said Canada will regret making this deal, while other senior U.S. administration staff have called it problematic. Meanwhile, President Trump has actually said it's okay, and that if you can get a trade deal with China, you should do it. Now, in exchange, China will reduce tariffs on canola seed, lobster, and other agricultural products. A big win for the Maritimes and Prairies, but at what cost to Ontario and manufacturing? I'm Cristina Howorun, and today on The Big Story, we're talking to Flavio Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, the visionary behind Project Arrow, Canada's first ever all-Canadian-made electric vehicle, and he's been at the negotiating table with Washington over tariffs. He's also one of many architects of CUSMA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now, Flavio is here to discuss the implications of this deal on Canada. Thanks for joining me today, Flavio.
A lot to unpack there, Christina, and no pieces of those are so minimal that we would pass over them. And any one of those would be problematic in today's trade environment. They all arrived today.
All of them. You've been cautioning Prime Minister Carney to tread carefully in his negotiations with China, particularly around this issue. What are your thoughts on the impact this deal will have on manufacturing in Ontario?
Well, what we saw on Friday in his joint meeting with President Xi was that to get access to market for the agricultural industries of this country that were held back by punitive retaliatory tariffs by the Chinese, we gave them, as you said, tariff-free access, except for that last 6%, which is the most favored nation, tariff access to about 2.5% of the Canadian auto sector. And so we left in the window the 100% tariffs on electric vehicles, but we said for 49,000 units, increasing 6.5% a year, you don't have that. And that's problematic in a few ways, but for Ontario workers and Ontario part suppliers is that while we've all spent the last year under attack by the U.S. and trying to buy Canadian and encouraging people to buy Canadian and trying to create resilient business models around the plants that are here and the parts plants that supply them, and for the anxious people who are not politicians, who just go to work and want to get paid, do their work, and go home and pay their bills and see their kids, we've made it. We've taken 50,000 units out of that 1.8 million unit market, and we gave them to somebody else that has no Canadian content, that have no Canadian workers, that have no Canadian software, no Canadian raw materials. But also that group, the Chinese manufacturing group, makes twice as many cars as all of North America put together every year. Their local market is declining a bit, so they've become more reliant on exports. They exported 1 million vehicles in 2020, 6 million vehicles last year, and they spread them around the world on a subsidy. So there's a lot of worry that this is a beachhead for the type of business adversary that will eat it all up.
There's talk, though, that potentially this could lead to China making big investments in plants in Canada, but there's no guarantee of that.
No, what we saw was an agreement in principle, and your listeners should understand the difference between that and the trade agreement we have with the U.S., which is we negotiated on a whole bunch of chapters and a whole bunch of industries and a whole bunch of product treatment with the U.S., and then we have enabling legislation that has to go to our parliament, it goes to their Congress, and it went to the Mexican Congress. This is an agreement where we quantified what we were giving the Chinese, market access, 49,000 vehicles. And they qualified what they were going to give in return, which was, in the automotive space, joint venture investment in manufacturing in Canada. There's an imbalance there. We should absolutely hold them to account on that. I do like the fact that the government negotiated some guardrails, 3-year review of this, and that we can walk away from it. The reason why I think it's going to be a real tough prospect is that the Chinese advantage is making in China with Chinese cost structure and Chinese control of their vertically integrated supply chain and Chinese labor costs. And that's why their cars are so cheap. And so if you had to make those cars in, I don't know, Oshawa, Ontario, that $15,000 BYD seal might be $28,000. The Chinese are not going to ramp up production, not likely to ramp up production in this country if those vehicles are also blocked in the U.S. There isn't enough elbow room for them to do it here. And so I'll believe it when I see it, and we will absolutely hold the government to account that if those investments aren't here, we gave them 150,000 units over 3 years of free access, and Bob's your uncle.
So let's just break this down, though, is that the U.S. still has 100% tariff on Chinese vehicles, but we're still trying to figure out or negotiate, and you're sitting at the table, I'm not, with the U.S. tariffs on manufacturing and on automotives. And, you've got CUSMA that's coming up for review. Is this going to have an implication on those negotiations?
So, when the last time we negotiated with the Americans, Krista Freeland was the quarterback, and she said, look, we're going to try with the first principle of do no harm. And that's the first filter of anything that we consider. Giving market access to the Chinese doesn't meet that first principle. There's no upside to it. And we've already heard from the Americans today, a little bit muted, but we'll hear about it at the negotiating table. They'll say those 50,000 units of imports is about $2 to $2.5 billion worth of imports that are going to displace our imports. You've cost our automakers, our parts makers, that. So we want it back. There's a reason why that number is 50,000, or why it was good enough for the Chinese. Because that's how much canola they were blocking. And so we'll give it back, and we want it in cars. And so we didn't improve our position with the Americans today. Now, the flip side of that argument, if we were dealing in a good faith world with the Americans, we'd say, you started this. You went and put an unsolicited tariff on cars that are made here, including ones that are made in American factories, and all of them by American auto parts. And it's only for your crazy behavior that we're even in this position. But that, we had no leverage. That's not, imagine having that conversation with Donald Trump. And when asked about, Mark Carney went and signed an agreement with the Chinese. What do you think? His first reaction was, well, I would do that too. But as we know, as time will pass over this next week or so, he may revisit that, as he's done in the past. His first reaction to the Doug Ford ads was, well, they went and bought some time, and I would have done that too. And then about 9 days later said, we're going to double the tariffs unless that thing comes down. So I didn't like it. Nobody liked it. As a Canadian, I'll take my auto hat off. I understand that those Canadians that work in those industries in the maritime and out west, and those Canadians that are putting capital at risk in those businesses needed relief. I hope they had a good day today, and I hope that the upside is worth it. We're still in the fight.
But it almost feels like Carney was trying to just balance out the needs of the West when it comes to, especially Saskatchewan, when it comes to canola, with the needs of Ontario. But the fact that Saskatchewan's premier was there, do you think that that played a role? That he was actually traveling with Carney and part of those trade discussions, whereas Ontario Ford was here, and he came out, days before this announcement saying this can't happen, and we've got to make sure that those tariffs stay in place. But he wasn't there in China. Do you think that made an influence?
As I understand it, that Scott Moe was already traveling in Asia and he joined the trip, and that Doug Ford was busy here. Although I'm not sure Doug Ford, if he wasn't busy, would have said I'd come on that trip. It does have the optics of, hey, by the way, Saskatchewan did the ride along and benefited from it. But I've been around these parts long enough to know that the coincidences sometimes are just coincidences. The Scott Moe was very clear over the summer, and I took him to task on a very specific day when the Chinese ambassador to Canada said on a television interview, in a very highly irregular moment, if Canada reduces or removes the tariffs on EVs, we'll remove the tariffs on canola. And then Scott Moe wrote a public letter to the Prime Minister. So a letter to the world addressed to the Prime Minister and said, please follow the instructions of the Chinese ambassador. So Scott put all his eggs in one basket, and it mostly paid off. I'm sure that is irritating to the Premier of Ontario, but the Premier of Ontario will live to fight another day on this. The guardrails that are in place on this is an opportunity for him to say, hey, by the way, I didn't see that investment. And I would know because it would only happen in Ontario.
Premier Ford was one of the first people to come out screaming about this deal. And, we have seen major investments in Ontario by the federal government, by the provinces, by private businesses in manufacturing and automotive over the past couple of years. But a lot of that has been stalled, especially in the EV realm. Do you think that this is going to create potentially further pauses or more delays?
It doesn't help. Okay. So it doesn't have the opposite effect. It's not going to spur more investment. And there's a lot of political capital people are spending for no return in the automotive sector. So that there's a point of frustration for the Premier, but also for those in the sector who consider the Premier a very strong advocate and partner. There are a few things in the works that have been reported lately that there are conversations with other market-driven Western automakers potentially looking at this province. It would take one of those to mute this, but it would take a full one of those. And so I know there's conversations with Koreans and the Germans. Of course, you alluded to it earlier. One of the things that we should absolutely look at is maybe the Mexicans are onto something by doing their own automaker. But we need increased capacity in this province, increased production in this province from market-driven players, from countries that are not hostile to us, to be able to mute out having given away 2.5% of the market to the Chinese.
I just want to go back a little bit to the EV mandate.
Yeah.
There's the goal of having 100% zero-emission lightweight vehicles being sold by 2035. Now, that was paused by the Prime Minister late last year. It was supposed to be a 60-day review. Have we heard anything on that? And what type of impact do you think that move has had on manufacturing here?
It has been a very loud and frequent request of the manufacturers here to get rid of it. You and I talked about it when it was first proposed in 2022, and I said, we won't make it. You could start handing out the fines now. It said 100% of sales in Canada must be battery electric or plug-in hybrid by 2035, and I thought that the real number would be about 35%. It came out at a time when there was purchase incentives in every major market and production supports in every major market, including especially the United States. Those incentives and those production subsidies have disappeared, led by the United States. And so for Ontario to bear fruit in the EV space, without it, the consumer market that represents 85% of the product destination is impossible. And so, we've been pushing very hard and we appreciate that the Prime Minister put a pause on it and then got rid of the 2026 targets. But we're also waiting to hear that they were permanently going to do away with this. Maybe go to a higher GHG regime, but a mandate that chooses a technology that only has a punishment on the supply side, but isn't accompanied by demand side solutions is going to fail. The only way to get there in a rapid fashion is to give away more of the market to the Chinese. And so we shouldn't be biting our tail. I fully hope and anticipate that the electric vehicle availability standard, or the EV mandates as regular people know them, are going to go bye-bye.
But this is once I heard about this trade deal, it's what I immediately thought is, we know that Ford and GM and Honda and everybody just can't that those targets are unrealistic for North American made vehicles. And it seems like these very affordable Chinese made vehicles could help to actually ensure that zero emissions mandate is actually met.
Yeah, sure. The mandate is an arbitrary target, meaning like regardless of why you pick it, and for noble, like it's a noble cause. Wherever you pick the number, you have to match it with industrial policy. You can cheat to get to that number by bringing in cheap Chinese vehicles that will eat up a whole bunch of percentage. But what you're doing is instead of pushing the local industry to a more resilient future with the products that people want, remember that the local industry is Canadian subsidiaries of major foreign automakers and Canadian companies doing the supplier, the part supply. Well, the part suppliers don't decide if it's electric or gas powered. None of the Canadians get a say in what product is being made there. It isn't a solution to just say, well, let's give all the benefits to the Chinese and screw the automakers. Well, you might want to not be nice to some of the automakers in this country at some times. But every one of the suppliers, 75% of a vehicle gets made at a supplier. Those are the Canadians. So let's not try to punish the people that we don't trust anymore, the Americans, by jumping into bed with the people we should never trust, and that the only losers are Canadians.
So you bring up a very good point there, because one of the reasons that the U.S. says they need these tariffs on Chinese EVs is because of security reasons. The technology that's involved, the mapping, the internet, all of that stuff that's in these modern cars gives them pause and reason for concern. Should we as Canadians be concerned about purchasing Chinese-made vehicles?
I've written about this and spoken about it for the last couple of years. Chinese-made vehicles isn't the right filter. Because there are Teslas made in China and there's Volvos made in China. It's Chinese brands that are state-owned enterprises who on these electric vehicles are connected vehicles. This is why a lot of people like them. It enables, over the air updates and a lot of communication, especially if they're partially autonomous. Sensors, cameras, all kinds of things that generate a lot of data in their operation. That all goes to the central database of whoever the automaker is. 25 years ago, General Motors debuted OnStar. It went to a satellite and you connect it to a switchboard. Now everything is just online. Now, when you go to China, when the Prime Minister's team goes to China and all the reporters get on that Challenger and they go to China, they bring burner phones because, of course, you have a security issue and access to the Chinese networks and Chinese hardware. We don't trust that your data's not going to get breached. Well, what if this was all that hardware and software was in a $25,000, $50,000 vehicle, hundreds of sensors, hundreds of connection points, and they were here and the data link is there? The Americans have said, and they've used Department of Commerce and Customs and Border Patrol, that they will be banning them soon. They started on this January 2025. They asked us, actually late 2024, they asked us to be part of it. If we're not part of it, what is very likely to be the case is you may be able to bring a car into Canada, but you can't drive it into the U.S. And while you might say, well, I don't really drive to the U.S., okay. Well, Canadian rental companies will not bring in fleets of Chinese made vehicles because they can't. Their customers are going to say, "Well, I'm not going to rent from you because I'm going to have to go to Detroit, or I got to go to Lake Placid, or I've got to cross into Seattle, and all the other places where we do a lot of cross-border movement." They really are an issue, and the Chinese themselves, when they first encouraged Tesla into their market, said that Teslas that are connected, who have a tech stack that's connected to Fremont, California, are not allowed within a radius of Chinese government buildings or military installations. None of this is conspiracy theory stuff. The Chinese know that this technology can be used that way. The Americans know that technology can be used that way. The Transport Canada review of Canadian safety standards, motor vehicle safety standards, is including this. I think it needs to be in place before we allow these vehicles.
So what would you like to be seen happen with this technology? Just that it doesn't actually go back to China?
Yeah, it's a very simple solution, and for example, what Tesla does now for China-based and China manufactured vehicles at their Shanghai plant is the tech stack stays. There's a cloud essentially that's there for Chinese market, and that's what the Chinese have asked Tesla to do, and so we would do the same here. If you're going to import BYDs or XPengs or Xiaomi's, they would have to certify their vehicles. They would have to have the cloud and database and the tech stack stay here. Now, there's a lot of great Canadian technology in this space. You go to the Kitchener, Waterloo, you go to Ottawa, you go to Edmonton, you go to Montreal. There's a lot of companies that are very, very world leaders in this space. And I think it's a pretty simple ask. Let's see if the Chinese think it's a simple ask.
It's a good question. And one very last question before you head off. How much do you think that this deal is going to impact the upcoming CUSMA review?
I think what's really important is to watch the next few days and weeks on how the Americans use this against us, which they will. Okay. Now we have cards, and we just gave them a card. Do they use it? Does Doug Ford does Donald Trump treat this like Doug Ford's ads, where a week from now use it as a fire he wants to start? Or does it hit the negotiating table with the Americans as we're doing the CUSMA review, and they say, the USMCA review, we export $30 billion worth of vehicles to Canada every year. You just gave away 2 or 3 of those. That's a 6 to 10% of our export market, which
is not insignificant.
Oh,
it is a considerable number.
Well, this is an industry that operates on 6 and 7% profit margins. It's might be the difference between making a go of it or not. And so they'll turn around and they might say, we want something in return. Oh, we have 25% national security tariffs on you. We'd go to 0% if you shut out the Chinese, and we'll go to 5% if you don't. Well, I take that deal any day. But it's going to cost us something. And you and I have spoken all year, and I've been quite public about the fact that I'm not sure we can ever trust the Americans again, but we're in a marriage we can't divorce from. And so we should find hobbies. We should find a better job so that we're more independent. We should listen to different types of music so we could find our own peace. But we're in the house, and we don't need to go get married to the Chinese. You can be long distance friends. We haven't trusted them for a long time, and let's not forget that, so that we could get some low price trinkets.
Well, especially with one of the most important industries in Ontario and Canada. Thank you so much for your time today, Flavio. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. I'm sure we're going to be talking again soon.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca, or reach us on Instagram @frequencypods, or on Blue Sky @thebigstory. Now, if you know someone that might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. You can listen to The Big Story every day on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcast. I'm Cristina Howorun. Thanks for listening.